Good evening, grade 12. This is Mr. Ross at Mtotsoland High School. We are busy with topic 2 in paper 2. Remember, we started off with the essay and we spoke about the negotiating process and the coming of democracy to this country. Now we have democracy. And immediately after the elections, I think Nelson Mandela was about 2 years in office. We are busy with source-based now. He then decided to put into action what we call the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And he wanted to leave a legacy of how South Africa would choose to remember the past. And Bishop Desmond Tutu, together with Mr. Alex Borain, was appointed the joint chairpersons of this committee, commission, whatever you want to call it, but it was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So what was the background to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? There was a lot of debates about the negotiating process between the ANC, National Party government, and the more they debated, the more it became evident that South Africans there was a need for reconciliation. There was a need for people to come together and say to each other that, yes, we had a terrible past. Yes, we come from a violent past, but we need to reconcile at some stage. So that was the context within this way this whole Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established. So the context of violence, they threatened the negotiating process, and the successes of the negotiations now had to be consolidated. What was the reasons for the establishment of the TRC? Firstly, there's different groups that were affected differently by the violence and the situations in our country. Apartheid on the one side, violence by the ANC on the other side, in this war for freedom in our country. And so, obviously, when people were talking about justice, there would be people who wanted restorative justice, and there would be people that wanted retributive justice. So what was restorative justice? It was healing and addressing the injustices of the past. So that is how the TRC described the restorative justice process. But on the other hand, you had retributive justice, which was punishment for criminal behavior. So you had these two different angles for justice in this country, and the retributive justice was something that reminded a lot of the Nuremberg trials after the Second World War, and it was something that we as a country wanted to avoid at all costs. So what was the debates concerning the TRC? So the TRC wasn't just accepted by everybody. Remember what TRC stands for. I'm going to reiterate every time. Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So there were positive aspects of this and there were negatives. The positive aspects of the TRC was the following. The rationale behind it was, the assumption was that South Africa were deeply divided and in need of healing. Not through a forgetting of the history of division, but through formal engagement with our history. The TRC was then a key instrument in South Africa's endeavor to find a post-apartheid reconciliation. So people did not want to forget what has happened, but they also didn't want retribution. They wanted to get formally, to get engaged or to engage the history so that they can understand each other much better. So more debates around the TRC was that there were people who questioned the significance of the TRC, and today, in hindsight, we can look back and say the significance of the TRC is related not only to the memory of the past, but also to the contribution and the memory of South Africa's transition to democracy. Future historians, in future, people will talk about this transition, and they will find the story of South Africa's reconciliation in the TRC's history and in the TRC's records. So the records of the TRC are as important as the memory resource, as the records of the past, which has both reclaimed and regenerated or generated. So if you look at the different debates, we can't leave out the negative aspects of the TRC. Look, we've already established that it is a positive thing. people want to look back in 10 years' time and 20 years' time, 30 years' time. We are now 26 years into democracy, and we look back and we say the TRC was a good thing. If it wasn't for the TRC, we would not be on this road to democracy. Then there's people who can argue this thing from another angle, and it has been suggested that its focus on gross human rights violations within a specific period contributes to a skewing of social memory. So what does that mean? Because they concentrated so much on gross human rights violations, they forgot about the other violations that has taken place and not addressed other violations that took place within the same time period. Its processes of selection and interpretation have been criticized because it has been accused, the TRC, of political bias. People were saying the TRC were pro-black, anti-white, and they probably were right to a certain extent. And many of its findings has been questioned. And even that is debatable, that some of the findings of the TRC can still be questioned. The people who attacked the church, those men were set free. They got amnesty, you know, and yet they killed 11 people. 50 plus people were seriously wounded. Yet they came to the TRC, they apologized, and yeah, they got amnesty. So it is debatable. The concept of amnesty has been challenged, and like I've just tried to explain to you, and specific amnesty decisions have been rejected by a lot of people. So as much as there were positive aspects of the TRC, there were negative aspects of the TRC. Two concepts that you must keep in mind: retributive and restorative justice. Restorative to heal, retributive to take revenge. So that will be something that, look, we're busy with source base, and the chances are always good that whatever case study they're going to give you, that two words will pop up somewhere, and normally that will be a 4-mark question. So you need to know the difference between the two. More negative aspects of the TRC was that its work of reparation and rehabilitation has been found inadequate. Some people received money, other people just got an excuse, other people just got an apology. So yeah, even there it wasn't well distributed, the findings of the TRC. Its contribution to reconciliation has also been questioned. At a later stage, I'll look at it nearer to the final exam, but so many people were summoned to come to the TRC and asked to come to the TRC out of their own free will, and thousands decided not to come. So we never got the whole story, and that is why people questioned the contribution towards reconciliation. Now, these are important debates that you can't just dismiss and say, well, it doesn't concern me, doesn't concern our country. It is important debates. It's important at many levels, not least in terms of their potential contribution to the process of reconciliation. If some of these questions were addressed properly, reconciliation would probably have taken much quicker and much faster than what it took this country. So South Africans finding one another, not by forgetting, in this instance, the work of the TRC, but by remembering and imagining a way forward. So now we're going back to the positives. How did it contribute to reconciliation? Contributed to reconciliation through the fact that South Africans could find each other. People came to testify. Other people could come and listen. What happened to my family member? How did this person die? And could say to people, listen, the fact that you are willing to confess and be open about it and apologize, I am willing to accept that. And even though it's difficult to forgive, I'm willing to move forward with you. And that was the process that the TRC wanted to encourage in this country. It is crucial that the TRC had to provide space for debates. The TRC couldn't just be a process where somebody will come in and they close this debate without another person getting involved. So if somebody says, I have killed your husband, I have killed your wife, killed your brother, killed your sister, killed your child, that person who are being addressed had an opportunity to ask questions, to ask why, to be informed about the details. And that is the kind of debates that the TRC encouraged. So part of the space is constituted by the archives of the TRC. So you can go back into the archives and read up and study the cases and case studies that has taken place. Now, I want you to note this one. Last year, 2 years ago, in the Western Cape June paper, common paper, we had the Ashley Krill situation. Ashley Krill's family recently, I think late last year somewhere, they had his case reopened. So don't be surprised if Ashley Krill comes up in the final exam as a case study. Ahmad Timo was a case study last year. And then during the course of last year, his family, he died in police custody in Johannesburg, and his family reopened his case. So Ahmad Timo can be another case. And then you have the Craddock 4. It was a case study. This is all case studies that came up during the TRC. And it might be that the people who set the papers can ask this as case studies again, because it is still relevant and ongoing. So the TRC is not something that happened and now everything is closed. Some of the cases are now readdressed again. Okay, so it is important that as a nation and as a country that we stick to open ourselves up to debating about these questions. The one thing that this is personal opinion, and this probably should not be your opinion, but this is how I feel. The one thing I had a problem with was this whole amnesty process. And let me explain to you, and then you can make up your minds. Amnesty provisions and the problems with amnesty is a huge point of debate under the TRC. Perpetrators were to apply for amnesty in relation to each of their offenses, okay? Provide a full disclosure and prove that their actions were politically motivated. Many applicants for amnesty had already been convicted through the courts and were in jail when they applied for amnesty. So, court of law is find a person guilty of a crime not politically founded. Now this person comes, he's sitting in jail, and he applies for amnesty and says, what I did was politically motivated. And then the TRC says, well, we understand it. And now this person can come out of jail because he receives amnesty. So, yeah, I don't fully understand or agree with it, but you make up your mind. Many others never came forward. They never came forward. People who committed huge crimes against humanity, and they just were never convicted because they never came forward. They never said, I did this, I did that. And they are just walking free because they never came to the amnesty committee. So, perpetrators who did not apply for amnesty, they faced possible prosecution. Now the word here, possible. If nobody knew what they did, how can they be prosecuted? So that, for me, is also a point of concern. The only serious incentive to participate in the amnesty process for those who had not been convicted was the threat of persecution. So, prosecution. If I am outside, I have not been convicted of any crime, but I did some crimes against whoever. If I know I'm going to be prosecuted, I'm not going to come to the amnesty committee. I'm just going to stay away. And then I can't be prosecuted. I will then, when I come to the amnesty committee, I'm using it as an example, I'm going to implicate myself. And it is why a lot of perpetrators never came forward and were walking free today. The amnesty process was one, it was generally accepted by survivors and society in more broadly. So the broader society accepted this process. And yes, we've heard about a lot of cases. There's videos being made and were distributed with the different case studies. But the process was accepted by a lot of people, and that is why it went forward. So, what was the focus of human rights in the 1980s? There were huge human rights violations, and they had to set up a committee for this. Now, what was how did they define human rights violations? It was, number one, the killing, abduction, torture, or severe ill treatment of any person, or any attempt, conspiracy, incitement, instigation, command, or procurement to commit an act of violence against an individual or a group of people. I'm going to repeat what was defined as human rights violations. The violation of human rights through, number one, the killing, abduction, torture, or severe ill treatment of any person, or number two, any attempt, conspiracy, incitement, instigation, command, or procurement to commit an act of violence against an individual or a group of people. So that would be gross human rights violations. If you look at the definition, it is clear that some people's rights were violated. So the ANC wanted justice. This was I'm giving you the political parties' responses. ANC wanted justice. This probably would have taken the form of prosecutions along with reparations and other efforts. So the ANC, their form of justice was that people should be paid out, and some of the perpetrators should be prosecuted. The former apartheid government wanted a collective amnesty. So they wanted everybody who committed a crime in the name of the National Party to defend the National Party, to defend the country, whatever, but they've committed a crime in the process. They want all those people to get blanket amnesty, so they should all walk. ANC says no, some of those people should be prosecuted for what they did, because it can't be motivated politically if you just kill somebody randomly. So the Truth and Reconciliation Committee or Commission, they became the creative means for responding to both parties' needs. They had to be very, very creative. The final report of the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, had 5 volumes, and if you can Google some pictures about it, it's like huge amounts of papers where all the testimonies of all the thousands of people who came to testify has been written up. So volume 1 provides the basis and the rationale for the work of the commission. Why was the commission set up? Number 2, the second volume addresses the commissions of gross human rights violations. Number 3 was to address these violations and human rights out of the perspective of the victim. So 2 and 3 go hand to hand, or go like together hand in hand. Volume 4 seeks to address the nature of the society in which this human rights violations took place. So in volume 4, they try to address why it took place in certain communities differently from other communities. There's this human rights violations. And then the final volume was of the report contains the conclusions reached by the commission, including analysis, findings, and recommendations. Now, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is not a court, so they could not find somebody guilty. They could not send somebody to jail. They could only recommend to the national prosecuting authorities that they prosecute people that they feel does not qualify for amnesty and so on. So today, we try to remember our past by appropriate museums and memorials and local and national sites. And of this ones, the biggest one is probably Freedom Park, where there's statues of all the icons and there's a hall of remembrance and so on, so that we never forget the work of the TRC and the history of our country. I thank you.